Hey everyone, and welcome to World Conservation Summits. My name is Tanya Anderson, and I am your host on this interview and this summit. Together with an amazing speaker, we get to know about an amazing topic we are digging into. Her name is Liz Tucson. Sorry, my friend, with your last name.
Tyson.
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 Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I appreciate it.
You are most welcome. So who is this lady and where is she from? So she is from the organization Born Free USA. And why I really reached out to this was because when I see these organizations, how they're working with, how we can look at wildlife, like how can we look at wildlife with new eyes? Why get me to see zoos on a new, like with new eyes? And they're really putting one of the video I really love from Born Free USA is the video where the first video I saw of the mini video was the video of like a cartoon or around lions, where the Lions Cub is coming and how we are treating the Lions Cub with the humans and what the Lion Cub is getting used for afterwards. And that is getting shots of the hunters and how the Born Free USA create that amazing touching video that is also here on the YouTube channels is really touching and bold and the truth in the short periods of way. And we need people as Born Free USA, as Liz, to really having an opinion and not be afraid around sharing for what is really happening out there with wildlife. So that's why I was reaching out to Born Free, and I've been very like in it, like I get to have this connection with them because this video is just so critical, important, and important message to share with the world. So that's why I was reaching out to you, Liz. Now you know it.
Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome. So share a little bit about what is Born Free USA exactly?
Sure. So, my name's Liz Tyson-Griffin. I'm Programs Director for Born Free USA, based in South Texas, but we have kind of people working all over the United States, and we're part of the larger Born Free family. Born Free Foundation was founded in the 1980s in the United Kingdom, where I'm originally from, and we kind of came off the back of the founding people were Virginia McKenna, Bill Travers, and their son Will Travers. Virginia and Bill were both actors, and they acted in the film Born Free from the 1960s. And then from there, they just started to think about our relationship with wild animals and the captivity of wild animals. And the main focus of the initial organization was actually on zoos. So it was known as Zoo Check before it became Born Free some years later. And the first, I suppose, the animal who really started it all wasn't Elsa from the film, which a lot of people think the female lion who was in the Born Free film. It was actually an elephant called Poly Poly. And the elephant was featured in a film that both Bill and Virginia starred in, and then was given as a gift to London Zoo. She died terribly prematurely, and that's what really triggered the founding of Born Free. Our underlying principles are keep wildlife in the wild. That's our kind of strap line, and that's what we want to see. We don't want wild animals in captivity. But I think the other thing that is interesting about our approach is that we're very focused on the individual animal. So we practice what we would call compassionate conservation. We're not just interested in saving species, we're interested in the well-being and the lived experiences of individual animals within those species.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And who is Liz Tyson? Like, where did your passion start for this passion about really supporting and serving the wild animals? Like, where did everything start in your journey for where you are today?
Thank you for asking. It was something of a coincidence in some ways. I was working in London for a financial PR company back when I was in my early 20s, which is now 20 years ago. And it wasn't for me. I didn't want to work in the corporate world. And the one thing that had been very consistent in my life was a love of animals. So really, I just started applying for any job whatsoever that would get me involved in animals. And I was incredibly lucky to land a role working as a caregiver at a primate sanctuary in the south of England. So I worked there for a number of years, and that kind of just opened a lot of doors for me. And since then, so I've cared for primates in a sanctuary setting for many, many years. And that kind of sparked my interest in the wider issue of wild animals in captivity. So I've managed to work in a number of countries around the world. I've been very, very lucky with some of the people I've been able to work with. And then I moved to the US about 5 years ago to take over the running of our primate sanctuary in South Texas, and also as programs director. So I head up all of our kind of campaigning and public advocacy work as well. I've been extremely lucky in my career to have the opportunities I've had.
Oh, amazing. And thank you for sharing. So to you, the audience, the topic Liz and we are getting to talk about now is the harm around zoos. So the harm they do to the individual, you get to support my friends, animals, and
legitimate
conservation efforts. It's like,
that's right.
That word is just like, oh. So Liz, tell us a little bit about why is this topic so important?
So I think in the kind of animal protection, animal rights community, quite rightly, there is a huge focus on other issues where animals are exploited in higher numbers. So, we have a lot of animal rights work and animal welfare work focused on farming, particularly factory farming, on vivisection. I think for me, the issue with zoos, why it's important is that zoos are completely unnecessary, and they are such a frivolous way to use animals just so we can go and see them. So these animals are kind of held captive for their entire lifetime so that we have something to do on a Saturday afternoon. And so I think there could be some argument that, zoos are kind of a more benign type of exploitation of animals. The animals are not being actively killed or harmed in a kind of cruelty sense, in the sense that we can talk about when we talk about, say, vivisection or factory farming. But for me, I think that's extremely important, because if we can't do something about zoos, which is, like I say, such a frivolous use of animal life, how do we expect to get to the point where we stop harming animals for our own sustenance, or, for the quote unquote advancement of medical science or research, which arguably is not what happens with vivisection. But so I think for me, zoos are very important because they're overlooked, and they're often ignored in our movement as something that we don't really need to focus on. But we have animals who are captive for a lifetime, who spend day in, day out in these spaces. If you think an elephant can live 70 odd years, that you could be taken to the zoo as a child, and you could take your grandchildren to the same zoo and see that same elephant in that same space. And if you think about the life that you've lived outside of that, and their whole life has been there, I think for me that's one of the most compelling reasons that we need to take action on zoos.
Yeah, it is so interesting, like that point of view. And also, like, what I really invite, like, everyone that is also watching is really save the money and traveling out to visit like sanctuaries and really experience hands-on where they're coming from and what is exactly wild animals. For me, what I see is like a lot of people also in my family and friends is can you hear something, or it's just me?
1 second. I'm sorry, I had some background noise.
Oh, it's okay. Normally it's just like, do I have a video up right now?
No.
I have experienced that before. I was like, oh, it's embarrassing. So it's just so interesting. Like also what you share is just like I also was there. Like I have an animal keeper education for 2010. I was finished with my education there. My view on what a wild animals is and to use for was so close, like was a lie, to be honest, as I see myself on how I look at wild animals. When the shift was really when I experienced like in the wild, where the animals is living, and compared to a zoo, it's just like, this is not normal at Sora. To have a new point of view, what is a wild animal exactly, and where it's coming from. Because if we just look at, as I was in the past, on a zoos, on TV, I did never know what is it exactly compared to when I was really experienced it, or experienced like on a sanctuary, like really like have it hands-on with like smelling seeds, feel it, instead of just like seeing things like in a closure.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, when we see animals in zoos, where there's a couple of things to your point, that we're not seeing them in their natural environment. So we're seeing this kind of, this sort of, you know, photocopy of an animal who is there without their natural environment, who is not behaving as they would in the wild, who's not interacting with their ecosystem as they would in the wild. And I think one of the most dangerous things about zoos in terms of what messages they're sending is that, on the one hand, we can talk about, you know, threatened elephant populations. We can talk about threatened tiger populations. We can talk about, you know, all sorts of endangered animals. And then we argue, you know, the zoos would argue that, you know, these places are teaching particularly young people to be interested in conservation. But I think that's a really contradictory message, that we're saying, you know, these animals are threatened, but you can go into your city, you know, a few miles down the road, and you can go and see one. So I think that must be a very confusing message, particularly for younger people who are trying to get to grips with what that means. You know, well, the tiger's right here. So how am I to believe that how am I to understand the wider issues around them if we've got this sense of, you know, well, they're fine because I can see the tiger's standing in front of me, and you're telling me that they're in danger somehow. I think those two things just don't really match up.
No. When you share that list, that was where I was in that point. Like before, there was the first time I chose to be a volunteer in 2013 in Borneo, work with sun bears. My like point of view, how I look at wildlife, changed completely. Like where I was, the side of it was, as I see it, was a lie. There was like this box of what I saw on the social media, what I saw on the TV, what I have been in the zoos, parks. I thought it was normal because they are doing good things for animals. And when I really dig into it, it's just like, no, it's not good this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So around that, when we talk about this list, like how can people start to change the point of view, how they look at zoos?
Well, I think there's a couple of things we can think about. I think there's a tendency when we speak out, so as Born Free or as activists who are kind of anti-captivity, when we speak out, a lot of the responses will be, well, you know, not everybody can afford to go on safari to Africa. So not everybody has this opportunity. And I hear that, you know, I think, you know, our disconnect with nature is increasing. I think, you know, people, particularly young people living in urban areas, have less contact with nature. But I think the premise of that question is just, it's incorrect and it's unethical, because I think saying that not everyone can afford to go on safari suggests that we somehow have a right to see these animals at the expense of the animals' lives. So, you know, I don't have any right. I've never seen an elephant. I've seen an elephant in a zoo when I've done investigations, but I've never been on safari. And I've worked for this cause for 20 years. So I think we need to shift our beliefs around what we're owed by animals, because I don't think we are owed the right to see them. I'm not owed the right to see an elephant or owed the right to see a tiger, and it's not for me to decide that they should spend their entire lives in captivity. For that one day, I decide that this is what I want to do for my recreation today, and then I'll go home and continue living my lives, and they just stay there waiting for the next person to come and stare at them. So I think we need to shift our thinking around that. And I think we also need to understand better the lack of conservation value that zoos have. There is zoos will argue that they exist for conservation purposes. And honestly, I don't think that's why people go to zoos. I think people go to zoos to look at animals, but the zoos have had to kind of recreate themselves as something more palatable to the general public. But what we know is that the vast, vast majority of animals in zoos are not threatened in the wild. It's something like above 80%. So most of the animals are there because they're popular for people to see. People want to go and see these animals. Animals who are in zoos are not released back into their natural habitat. There's literally, you can count on two hands the projects that literally since the beginning of zoos have been successful in reintroduction. The percentage of money and percentage of support that's given to conservation efforts by zoos is minimal. It's in the, between like 1% and 5% of their income, and the rest of it goes back to maintaining the zoo. So what we're seeing is this huge investment, huge financial investment. The carbon footprint of zoos are huge. Staffing investment in infrastructure, so the cafes, the playgrounds, the merchandise, all of that. And that investment isn't going towards conservation. That investment is going towards running the zoo as essentially an entertainment facility. So I think that's really important to note. And I think also there's the kind of more ethical and wider issue that zoos were founded upon this kind of very colonial desire to own wildlife. That's where they started. And there is, we're ignoring vital community-led conservation efforts in range state countries. There's a lot you'll see when you go to zoos as part of their education. A lot of talk about, the zoo scientists working with the local people to educate them about their own ecosystems, which is just, it's the wrong way round. It's the wrong way round. And it's built on this kind of colonial narrative upon which the whole conservation movement was founded. And there's a move away from that, thankfully, in many places where we're recognizing that local indigenous knowledge is often far more valuable than the Western scientists who are kind of dictating their sort of plans and ideas on local communities. But it's still rife that we have these kind of Western institutions kind of attempting to dictate to often the global South what they should be doing with their own environment, and it's not collaborative. And there will be some exceptions, even within the zoo industry. There will be some conservation efforts that are genuinely collaborative, but historically, and from what we've seen as the main, zoos are not contributing in significant ways to conservation. So I think as well, there's an argument that people do not care about conservation unless they see the animals, and that just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So zoos claim that people visiting the zoo gets people interested in conservation, and therefore they will donate, they will support conservation efforts. But the two largest funders of field conservation efforts, which are the World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy, dwarf the amount of financial support that's given to conservation by zoos, because zoos make up a tiny, tiny percentage of the amount of money that these two individual organizations who don't hold animals captive do in terms of field conservation. And that's not to say there aren't issues with WWF and Nature Conservancy, but that's kind of it's a different issue. The argument that holding animals captive is necessary to field donations is simply untrue, because the entirety of the financial support that the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums gives to conservation efforts is less than those two individual organizations on their own.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a little bit crazy. Wow, that is, I did not know that facts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is crazy. So let's say when we talk about that, like, it's just so interesting, like, also to you, the audience, is so important, like, also really, like, stand for what you believe. And as Liz have experienced, as I believe Liz has experienced, I definitely have experienced it. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable to really stand for what you believe. Like for me, with my families and friends, like I say, I will not visit a zoo and put my foot in a zoo or park. If you would like me to go on a trip, let's go on a trip to visit a conservation center that is doing a huge, important job for conservation and releasing the animals in the wild again. I will more or rather saving up all my money to get on a big trip and supporting that cause and supporting that organization compared to put my foot in the zoo and pack. And that was uncomfortable for me in the beginning. I get a little bit judgment, really reaction of my family, because now I'm cutting off all the family times in the summer. Just like we can also go for a walk in nature and experience the wild nature, the wild animals that is in Denmark. There's always a way how we can get connected on other levels, on experience, and as you share, connect with nature. Like I really believe, as you also share, Liz, there's so many people that are so disconnected with the animal kingdom, like the natural world, where we're getting life from, like the earth, water, and foods, and we have no clue what it is exactly, besides the impact we get from social media or zoos and pack or from a childhood, and we think that is the right way or that is normal way, instead of really ask that question, like, what is it exactly?
Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious to know, like, on a family, on people that is visit zoo, that is also seeing this into how can they start to make a small change in lifestyle that is supporting your work and supporting the message you guys are really putting out there?
Well, I think the easiest thing is to not go to the zoo. I don't think anybody loses anything. I think, like, coming back to what I said initially, we're not talking about, when we talk about factory farming and that, people mold their lives around food and what they eat and all of those things. But going to the zoo is not going to the zoo is not a sacrifice. Everybody can live without going to the zoo. So I think that's one thing. And I think, also if you are, for example, a lot of schools will take children to the zoo. So I think, parents, if they don't want to pull their children out of those visits, to kind of maybe work with the school, work with the teachers, at least make those visits more about critical thinking. So, if the school is going to the zoo, then, rather than just looking at the animals, look at, try and find those issues. Look at, why are these animals pacing? Why are these elephants swaying their heads? Why are these bears bobbing backwards and forwards? Why are they living in concrete enclosures? Make it an exercise in critical thinking rather than just a fun day out. So I think that could be an interesting way for young people to start thinking more about zoos. And I think just generally, questioning when you see a wild animal in captivity, just thinking really clearly about what that means for them, what that means for their welfare, what that means for their lives, and just practicing empathy and compassion, I think.
Oh, it is so good. It's so good. That is so interesting. Yes, it was up in awareness about, like, ask the deep question, like really ask open questions around what is it exactly is, and really put ourselves in there, do self-development. That is interesting. I choose to ask my family, like, have some questions. Say, I have a exercise for you guys when you go into the zoo. Can you please ask yourself these questions when you look at animals? From a good point, like really, like, also to serve them into see the world differently, because when we choose to see the world different, like when we go into the zoo, ask the questions, like have some questions and ask, like, why do the animals do this, or go on YouTube and see where does the animal come from, so you can compare to what is a wild line, what is a captivity line, like what is the nature behavior, what is not doing. So that is so interesting. When you also really sharing about, like, wild animals, before I was traveling to Guatemala, I have 2 parrots at home. I saw them as pets, like a family animals, to be honest with you. And when I was down there in Guatemala, I learned something that was so horrible, because the Amazon, the Amazon, like the parrots, the Amazon is coming down there from, and how they are taking the parrots is putting, like, glue on the stick, and the birds is sitting on the stick. The feet is just stuck. They're taking the nest in there, like taking the eggs and making them old, like growing them, or what you call, like feeding them. And they're still getting so many parrots from the nature. And they have a huge lesson there is, from that day on, I will do my effort on never show my parrots, because that show other places in the world it is okay to have a parrot, and a parrot is a wild animal. Like that is, as I see it, is more close to a wild bird compared to if you have a dog or cat.
Agreed.
So it's just so interesting. That was just like, that is horrible. And so it's just like, I will not show that anymore, because that show other people it is okay, and they go out there and supporting that cause that is horrible what it's doing to like the animals down there, to take the eggs from them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that. I love that you're open about that, like learning journey that you've been on, because I think that's really important to, like you say, critically think and accept new information when we find it, because we're learning so much, as time goes on. If we compare what we knew, I think this is the other thing, we compare what we knew 200 years ago when zoos were first founded, and some of them are still sitting on the same, footprint. So you think like Regent's Park Zoo in London, and what we've learned in the last couple of centuries about animal welfare, animal sentience, animal behavior, ecosystems, conservation, and we haven't switched the pattern of behavior that we're following. And that just, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
That's why it's important to create a new movement around what is conservation exactly.
Agreed. Yeah. Absolutely.
So interesting. So let's say, what else is important for the audience to know about, let's say, what is a wild animal, what is the zoo, what do we have to share around that? Because it's interesting. When I'm volunteer, I love to be a volunteer. I will go out there traveling, and a lot of people have an interesting point of view what is a wild animals, also when it's coming from the nature and they're looking after them. So that I would like to know, like, what is your point of view? Like, what is a wild animal exactly?
Sure, that's a great question. So a wild animal, let me talk first about what a domesticated animal is, because it's easier to do that for the comparison. So domestication of animals, so you take a dog, for example, happens over millennia, over tens of thousands of years. And what that does is it genetically changes an animal from one species to another. So basically what we've ended up with, my 3 rescue dogs who live in this house are not wolves. We know that they are descended from wolves, but they are not wolves. And I think what I would love people to understand is that wild animals who are born in captivity have not been genetically changed in that way. And so what that means is they retain their hardwired needs, they retain their hardwired instincts, they retain all of their adaptations to live in their natural environment. So even if we are multiple generations down the line, we still haven't got to the point where they're different animals. So a lion is still a lion, an elephant is still an elephant, and they are genetically the same as their free living cousins and relatives. And what that means is that they are simply not adapted in the same way that my rescue dogs are adapted to live in my home, with some, caveats, as long as they get enough exercise, as long as they're fed okay, as long as they get veterinary care. But wild animals are fundamentally unsuited to being kept in captivity because they have not been through that genetic process. And we see a lot, we don't tend to see zoos arguing that their animals are not wild, because that would debunk their own claim that they are creating a reserve population of wild animals who never get released. What we did see was that circuses and other places where animals were used in entertainment and had, direct interaction with people, they would argue that, their lions were domesticated because they'd been bred for 5 generations. That's simply not true. And it's very interesting that zoos cannot pretend that their animals are not wild, because it would just undermine exactly what they're saying they're trying to do.
Good point. That is an interesting point. And also when you also before we're ending this, before I share, like in the beginning around one of your one of the videos that really touched on point was the video around the lions, like the cartoon video, was share a little bit about that, because a lot of people, I still experience when I talk to people when they have like been down there. My mom was going down to Africa one place, to a cheetah place. I was just like, okay, what is, and I asked like all these questions, like what to do. And I was saying that around what is the line, because I still experience some places in Africa, they are promoting, put it out there around, we are saving the lions, leaving the lions and putting free again, and has been in a human contact with like bottles, and then when they will see the wild again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that video was produced by our UK office. It was a number of years ago now. I remember it was first shown in the US at a fundraising event that we did in LA a number of years back, before COVID and all of that. And I saw it for the first time there, and I probably saw it about 3 or 4 times over that weekend, and I cannot watch it without sobbing. It's heartbreaking. But yeah, what that video, I'd recommend everybody checks it out. You'll find it on, you can find it on YouTube, you can find it on the Born Free Foundation website. What that speaks to is the canned hunting industry. So it's linked to the trophy hunting industry, but it's probably it's an even more cruel practice, because as you say, these lion cubs are bred deliberately to then be hand raised. So they are tamer, they're still wild, but they are tamer and more used to being around humans than their, sort of their free living counterparts. And what that means is that they trust humans more. They don't see them as a threat. When these animals are older, they start off and people will have photos taken with them because they're exploited throughout their whole lives. And they'll have photos taken with them as photo props. They'll often be kind of touted as being cared for in a sanctuary or a reserve, which isn't true. As they get older, of course, they get more and more aggressive, they get more dangerous, so they cannot be in direct contact with people. And that's when they're put out to essentially be hunted. And canned hunting is a form of trophy hunting, but it's where the animals are contained in a significantly smaller area so that you can basically guarantee that you are going to get your kill. So these animals who've lost a lot of their fear of humans are not behaving naturally. So when a hunter comes upon them, they won't run away. And they're far easier to kill that way. And there is this awful cycle of these cubs running through these canned hunting operations. And yeah, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And these trophy hunting is a whole other issue, but it's something that these companies control the profits from that as well. There are, I think, frankly, ridiculous arguments that would say that trophy hunting somehow supports the conservation of species. Nothing could be further from the truth. This money stays within these companies. Often these companies are owned by foreigners to the country they're running in. It doesn't support local economy. It doesn't support conservation of species. And it is just inherently horribly cruel, horribly cruel.
It is. It's just so interesting when I see a lion like in a Netflix TV series or something, that video is popping up because that makes me so strong impact in me, like the process they are going through. Here to the end, Liz, sharing a little bit about the audience out there is so critical and important. And Liz and me will invite you guys to ask the question, like really put it down. And if you need support out there, reach out to Born Free USA and say, hey, can you please write some questions to me? I believe you also can find something on their webpage. So you have something with you in your hands, so you can remember what to ask, and we'll have it with you where you're going if you choose to be in a zoo or pack, so that we will invite you to do. So share a little bit about here to the end. What can people do around the new side of what is conservation, like the efforts that is so important that we all put attention on?
So what conservation efforts do we think people should be supporting? Is that the question?
Yes.
So I think a couple of questions to ask is, if we're talking about financial support, if you're planning on giving financial support to conservation efforts, follow the money, see where it's going. A good non-profit organization who's doing true conservation work will have their annual accounts, they'll have their project information out there. If you can't find that, then that could be something that you need to question. I think looking at collaboration with local and indigenous communities when working in range states is incredibly important, and in a meaningful, not in a tokenistic way. So potentially looking at projects who, you know, if they're just calling, if the non-profit workers are the scientists and the indigenous people are the guides or something along those lines, that would give me some red flags, because these efforts should be collaborative. Ideally find locally led conservation efforts, because those are the ones run by the people who know what's going on and who have the power to change things. But I think a lot of the time asking questions about, where is my donation going? Where are my efforts going? What is the end result, and what tangible results can you show me that you have achieved in the conservation of whatever it is you're looking at, if it's a species, if it's an ecosystem, if it's a protected area. I think just asking smart questions, and anyone who's doing good work will be able to answer those questions, and will want to answer those questions because they will be excited about what they're achieving.
Exactly. Amazing, Liz. So where can the audience find you guys? Like, where do you get to go? Where?
Sure. So you can find out about our work at bornfreeusa.org. From there, I won't go through all of our social media handles. From there, scroll down to the bottom of the page and you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, probably some other things as well. So yeah, head over to our website. You can find out more about our work on zoos. We also work on a number of different important issues, which we work on here in the US. We work on fur farming, on trapping, coexistence with wildlife, the exotic pet trade, and a whole host of other things. We have a fantastic program working out in West Africa. So come and check out our website, have a little explore, see what you can find out. And if you want any more information, then you can just shoot us an email using the contact page and it will get to the right person. We're a pretty small team, so you can always guarantee you're going to get a response.
Amazing. Thank you so much. The last words you would like to end this amazing interview with, if there is one thing the audience choose to go with, what is the one thing you would like the audience go with?
What's the one thing? I would say, I suppose like I've said a few times, think critically and ask questions. If you're seeing wild animals in spaces where they don't belong, then they're probably not having a good time. That's a very simple way of putting it. But yeah, ask questions, think critically. People who are doing good are keen to share that with you, and we'll be able to tell you exactly why they're doing it. So yeah, I think just kind of really thinking for ourselves and questioning some of the overriding or common narratives around exploitation of animals.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Liz, for bottom of my heart, for your time, for you to be here. It was a dream come true. Wow.
You're very sweet.
I've seen you a few times on the social media, your face. It's like, oh, I'm going to talk with Liz.
That's very sweet, Tanya. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You are most welcome. It is a huge blessing, and thank you for bottom of my heart to be bold, to be honest, to really be front of the line on, ask the critical questions, have opinion, not be afraid to share about it, because that I see is really needed in this world, is having strong leader at you guys that is brave enough to say it how it is and show it how it is, and be okay with what you will see for people that is against that. Because we need strong leaders. So thank you so much for bottom heart, for you to be a role model for me to look up to someone, to always go to next level of my effort and my communication with people. So thank you so much, Liz.
That's incredibly kind of you. Thank you. And thank you for everything you're doing, Tanya.
You're most welcome. And thank you so much, dear audience. We will invite you to go to bornfree.org right now and click on all the social media, follow them, and also say yes to the newsletter, so that you receive all information to get updates on what they're going on newsletter, because that will always remind you about this amazing interview, and also get connected with what they work and get informed and always be a part of it. So we will invite you to go follow the social media, and definitely also in your emails, so that you are in connection with them. So thank you so much for you to be here, for your time. And we wish you the most amazing day, guys, and have a blessed day.